Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you my top 10 favorite horror and thriller books that are backlist, meaning that they were written before 2021. This is part of my Best of the Year series. In total, I'm going to do 5 videos talking about my Best of the Year backlist and front list for horror, thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy. So if you're new here and that sounds good, I hope you stick around and subscribe. I'm going to have a playlist linked in the cards and description box. And again, today I'm talking about older horror and thriller books that I read for the first time this year. And I gotta admit that I spent most of my time in terms of stabby books focusing on new releases, and so not all the books I'm going to be talking about here are necessarily 5-star reads, but these were the top 10 that really stuck out for me in terms of those older books, and hopefully I have some good recommendations for you all. Let's get started. First, at number 10, we actually have a middle grade horror book, and that is Thornhill by Pam Shmee. This is a story that is very unique in terms of its structure. It's told over 2 perspectives, one being that of a young girl who is an orphan, so she's attending a foster home, and she's very upset when she finds out that another girl who previously bullied her is returning there again. And then the story is also told in the present day from a young girl's perspective who is looking around an old building that used to be an orphanage and then is kind of investigating and finding out what all happened there. What makes the story so unique is that the present day timeline is told only in pictures with no words. And you wouldn't think that that would work very well, but the author did such a good job of portraying everything that is happening that it was very easy to follow, and it just made it so unique. Now, the timeline set at the orphanage, I'll admit, was a little bit predictable. It certainly followed tropes that I have read many times before, but again, I just found the way the story was written was just so unique and comforting and really left an impact on me, one that I really thought about when it was finished. And I've got to say, the ending itself, as an adult, as a parent, was pretty terrifying to read. So it really showed me that middle grade horror is not to be looked down upon. It really is a book that I think appeals to people of all ages, myself included as an adult, and I would recommend it if you're open to middle grade horror. This is an excellent one to try. Then at number 9, we have Penance by Kane Manito, and this is a story translated from Japanese. It's a bit of a horror thriller that follows a group of girls that when they were young, something terrible happened to one in their group, and the rest of the girls feel a certain amount of responsibility for what happened. And so the story is them reflecting back on their childhood. They begin the story talking about how they used to do these doll tours, looking at their various dolls, and then again, things go terribly wrong from there. I really love the beginning of the book. The beginning was so strong, I was certain I was going to give the book a full 5 stars because it deals with girls coming of age, girlfriend groups, and how they can be mean girls, and just, I love those dynamics. It deals with creepy dolls, and the setup was oh so good. It was oh so biting. And the reason that this book is as far down the list as it is the fact that, in my opinion, the narrative really fell apart in the later sections of the book, and it just didn't have a really cohesive story that I wanted it to be, but the beginning was so good. I would reread it again just for the beginning, so I need to give this one a more cautious recommendation, but it definitely had potential, and I would definitely read more by this author. Then at number 8, we have The Collector by John Fowles. This is a story following a man. It's told from his perspective, and he sees a beautiful young girl, and as someone who likes to collect butterflies, he then decides to also collect young girls, and so he makes a plan to kidnap her away and hold her in a prison. And the story is just very compelling. In my mind, that this is a story worth reading for anyone who enjoys thrillers, because it really shows the beginning of the modern genre, a story that's told from the perspective of the villain, of the kidnapper, and I found it to be so creepy, so unsettling. The writing is very unique, and I liked it a lot, even though it just kind of was a bit off kilter. There were a few narrative choices in the middle that I didn't particularly love, which again is the only reason this book is not higher up on the list. But again, if you love thrillers, I really encourage you to read this one. It is amazing how modern it feels considering when it was written, and absolutely holds up to modern reading reading in the present day. Then at number 7, we have Nana by Brandon Massey. This story starts out at a funeral where they are grieving the loss of a woman who was their adopted mother. And so at the funeral, another woman shows up to share her losses and introduces herself as this woman's real biological mother. And so because she has just lost her adopted mother, she is very open to reaching out and connecting with her first biological mother. And from there, they welcome her into her family. She possibly gets a little bit involved or entices the husband, who is, from the beginning, you learn, a bit unfaithful himself. And it's a really strange story because the mother figure is both this magical, wonderful grandmother figure, and then she's also very sexy and very weird, and the story just gets creepier and more disturbing as it goes along. It is a bit predictable. I was able to see where the story was going, but it happened to go to a place that I really enjoy, so I did not mind it. I really liked the tropes that it brought in, and I had a lot of fun with this one. I thought that it really played with family dynamics between the couple, who again are just struggling with their own relationship, as well as the dynamics of mothers and daughters. And I just really liked it. It was fun and just a really good solid horror read this year. Then at number 6, we have Meat by Joseph Delancey, and this is a story set in a small town where there is a meat packing plant. And because this plant is so key to the economics of the community, it is really shown or held up almost with religious fervor within the community. Everyone is very passionate about the importance of getting meat and protein in for their families. The story is told from the perspective of a man who works at the plant, and because of the nature of his job, he's actually vegetarian himself and is just really put off by the process, but he needs to provide for his family. And it's just a story that is really showing the horrifics of meat production. I believe the author himself became vegetarian or vegan through the process of researching and writing this book, and you can definitely see why. While I am myself still a meat eater today, I definitely think that books like this really made me think twice about my own consumption practices, and this book really gets dark and gruesome and creepy, and it just twists things around. It does get a touch preachy, which is why it's a little bit lower on this list, but if you can look past that, I thought that the story just had some really entertaining and messed up ideas in it, which is always something I'm looking for when it comes to a good horror story. Then at number 5, we have Murder in the Family by Jeff Blackstock. And this is actually a true crime book, so it technically is a stabby book, but I'm maybe veering a little bit away from fiction into nonfiction. This is the story of a Canadian diplomat and his family who were way overseas when their mother died of mysterious circumstances, some kind of illness. And then years later, the children were investigating what happened, and through a series of letters and information, talking to witnesses, etc., they came to believe that their father was actually responsible for their mother's death, that he murdered her and got away with it. And this was one of the most compelling true crime books that I've read in a really long time. The author, right from the get-go, does acknowledge the fact that because of the nature of the story, there is no justice at the end. But if you are okay going into a story where there are no smoke and gun conclusions, this book tells a really compelling narrative, and it's up to the reader to interpret everything that is provided to you and just decide if you are going to come to the same conclusion that the children did. And what a terrible conclusion to come to look back on your childhood and see it through a very different lens. I gotta say that this book just was so compelling to read. I found myself obsessed with the case, and it's just one that I want to revisit again and again, go through all the details, and just what a compelling story. So highly recommend. If you're a fan of true crime, this is definitely my backlist pick for this list. Then at number 4, we have Let the Right One In by John Levita Lillenquist. And this is a horror story that follows a young boy who is being horribly bullied in school. One day he meets a young girl that has just moved into the neighborhood, and they become very close friends. This is very much a story of their relationship, of their friendship, but it also is a vampire story because that young girl is possibly not a young girl at all, but rather a creature of the night. You have heard me say so many times that I do not enjoy vampire fiction, so the fact is that this made the list really speaks to the fact that it is something very special. This book for me works because it doesn't really follow the classic narrative of the subgenre. Instead, it's so much more about the characters, and it's a really powerful story. I do need to give huge content warnings for abuse, pedophilia, and all sorts of violence, so it's not for everyone. It's very hard-hitting, but it's also very emotional because of that, and I really fell in love with this one. For disclosure, I do need to mention this is technically a reread for me. Normally I don't include rereads on my best of the year list, but the first time I read this book, I think I only gave it a measly 3 stars, and I'm shaking my head how I did not fully appreciate it the first time around. This time I fell in love with the characters, the narrative, and it was such a powerful reading experience that I really wanted to uplift this book and highlight it on this list. It also has some really interesting trans representation, which is more in the subtext, but again, if you're looking for that, I really do think it's there, and I would definitely recommend this one to anyone. If you like vampire fiction, or if you're like me and don't usually like it, this one will still likely appeal to you. Then at number 3, we have Only the Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a horror novel that follows a group of young Indigenous men who are of the Blackfoot tribe. Years ago, they went on a hunting trip that went horribly wrong, and now years later, they are dealing with the consequences. They are starting to see the elk that they were hunting. It seems to be haunting them and slowly, potentially killing them off. This book is one that took me a while to get into, but it was so worth it in the end. I talked about this book earlier in the year, and it took me, I think, 3 attempts before I finally was able to connect with the story and finish it. The narrative is just very unique, and for me, it worked a lot better once I tried it on audio. But once I got into it, wow, was I hooked. Because this book has amazing imagery, it has some really gruesome and haunting moments, and it's so smart, it's so well written. Of course, it has amazing social commentary on what it is like to be a young Indigenous man, and I really love Stephen Graham Jones' own voice's perspective because he's so honest and unflinching in how he tells his stories. This one is just smart, and the narrative structure is just so well plotted, and it really made me understand why everyone loved it so much. This, of course, was a 2020 release, so it nearly would have made my list, but I didn't read it until January of this year, so that's why it ended up on my backlist for 2021. So highly recommend. Then at the number 2 spot, we have a thriller, and that is The Memory Wood by Sam Lloyd. This is a story of a young, intelligent girl who is going off to a chess tournament when she gets kidnapped away by some mysterious person. She ends up in this locked room, and between visits from her kidnapper, there's also a young boy that comes to visit her. He also is highly intelligent, and together they are trying to figure out what to do. She is trying to convince him to help her escape, but for reasons and circumstances, he is reluctant to do so. He doesn't want to get himself in trouble, and the story goes from there. If you don't know my taste in thrillers, you should know that I really love a good kidnapping story, and this one was so well plotted. It's told from multiple perspectives, and normally I don't like hearing from smart little children, but these ones were not obnoxious. They are intelligent, and the way they're written is very purposeful. There's some really good twists and turns, and I don't want to oversell the story, but there definitely were some twists that I did not see coming that made for a really good surprise along the way, and I just thought it was just so well done, so memorable, and definitely one of the best backlist thrillers that I read. I've said before that I've kind of had a hit or miss relationship with thrillers over the last few years, but every once in a while I find a gem like this that makes me remember why I keep coming back to the genre. So if you're a fan of thrillers, definitely one you want to check out. Finally, at the number 1 spot, we have a book I've been gushing about all year long, so you can probably guess what I'm going to say. That is Tender is the Flesh, and this is a story set in a dystopian future where animal meat has become dangerous to consume, and so in order to allow people to continue to eat meat, they have allowed the production of what they call special meat, which you find out very quickly is actually breeding humans for consumption. The story is told from the perspective of a man who works in the meat plant, and his job is to murder or kill those specimens. And then at the beginning of the story, he receives a gift, and that is a female creature who he has to take care of until they are ready to slaughter. And through that, his feelings potentially become complicated, and he starts to second guess what he is doing, and the story goes from there. This is one of the most dark, disturbing, messed up books I have ever read. It is so unique. Certainly it has a similar setup to the book Meat I talked about earlier, but this book, in my opinion, is pretty flawless. I gave it a solid 5 stars. The ending blew my socks off. I loved it so much, but this book is definitely a lot to handle. I had to wait until 2021 to read it because I just don't think I was emotionally ready to read it last year when it was first translated. And oh my goodness, you need to be prepared for quite the experience, and it really delivered everything that everyone promised it would, and I just cannot stop gushing over this book. I highly recommend it. If you have the stomach for it, it's definitely worth picking up. And again, I don't think it's preachy whether you eat meat or not. This is just a really good book with some really good social commentary. Highly recommend. So that is it. We've made it to the end of the video here. I would love to know, of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out? And I'd also love to hear, what was your favorite horror, thriller, or true crime book that you read that was published before 2021? If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of these genres, as well as adult science fiction and fantasy. And don't forget that you can check out my playlist with even more recommendations. Again, by the end of the year, I'm going to have over 50 recommendations for you all. It was a fantastic reading year, and I can't wait to talk to you more about the frontlist books in the coming weeks. So if you are new here, subscribe. You can also hit that thumbs up button to help me out. You can share this video around online, and if you hit the little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.